Hello and welcome. I'm Jenny Blake, Associate Director in UCD Alumni Relations, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the first webinar in the series of What It Takes, brought to you by UCD Alumni Relations and UCD Careers Network. Since COVID-19 struck and the global pandemic changed our world, some industries are in flux, and the future for employment is uncertain for so many. Almost overnight, approximately 500,000 people in Ireland have become dependent on government support for their income, the majority of whom are under 35. We hope this series, called What It Takes, will help students and graduates like you to find out what it takes to navigate your career at this uncertain time. Our expert speakers, who are alumni, industry partners, and our own UCD colleagues, will give you some practical advice and insights on how to be agile, respond to the current situation, and guide you to where the opportunities are. We'll go live at lunchtime every second Wednesday with a different topic each time. We really hope you'll find the webinars useful. We'll continue to tune in to hear from our speakers over the summer. Now, to kick off the first webinar, let me introduce you to my colleague in the UCD Careers Network, Michelle Cohen, who works as a team leader and career and skills consultant. Michelle will introduce our speaker today and manage the Q&A afterwards. Over to you, Michelle.
Great, thanks very much, Jenny. So we're delighted to welcome Frank Farrelly, who's COO and co-founder of Sigmar Recruitment, to our first episode in the What It Takes series. Frank is a graduate of UCD, so he studied economics and politics for his BA before going on to study a postgrad in the Michael Smurfit Graduate Business School, and then began an extensive career in the recruitment industry. As a careers professional myself, I'm really looking forward to this session. I think it's brilliant to have an industry expert like Frank to kind of take us through what's happening in the recruitment landscape at the moment. And Frank, in his role with Sigmar Recruitment, with so many different organizations across so many different sectors, will be able to give us a really great insight. So Frank's going to take us through his presentation, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask some questions. So don't be shy. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so type any questions into that, and we'll have a few minutes at the end to take some questions. So Frank, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everybody. There's no doubt that the world and the labour market has been turned on its head in the last couple of months. We've had a bit of a COVID Armageddon. I think the CSO said that roughly in May, about 28% of the working population were on some sort of government support scheme. So it's certainly unforeseen times. But today I'd like to give you a what's hot and what's not in the landscape, and maybe talk about a little bit what's in your span of control, what you can do, and then make my my attempt anyway at predicting the future and some of the trends that are emerging. So where are the jobs? No surprise, there's lots of demand in retail, grocery, butchers, off-license, takeaways, frontline healthcare, health and safety, and also some e-commerce. So I don't think there's any surprise there. A lot of the jobs are probably not available unless you're a specialist. But areas that are, companies recruiting in Ireland include TikTok, Shopify, Amazon. So it's worthwhile to start, if you're looking for a role, to start following these companies. Doing okay, IT, pharma. So IT, especially infrastructure and connectivity, roles are up. To give you an indication of how strong demand is in, say, developers, we're still in Sigmar placing people who are getting sponsorship. So IT professionals are okay. There are some companies like Travelport and maybe Car Trawler who are linked to the travel industry or hospitality that are struggling, but IT is doing pretty good, as is pharma quality. A nice surprise is that the funds industry has improved this year. It's probably linked to the fact that there's less outsourcing to India at the moment. And also construction is returning faster than we probably anticipated a couple of months ago. Some areas are finding it tough though. Accountancy, senior execs, HR, legal, marketing, they've been badly hit. In Sigmar, we've seen demand fall between 70 and 90%. But the worst hit are undoubtedly hospitality and aviation. Aviation is in big trouble. It's survival for a lot of them at the moment. But they're taking steps. I know a lot of the stuff on television last night on prime time was about how they're going to lay out the seats in the plane. But I was just thinking, like, if they implement social distancing, imagine where the queues will end up for in airports within the long-term car park queuing. Some trends. So work from home, normalized for majority, nearly overnight. Salaries and benefits in the private sector, in most sectors, are falling. Part-time furloughs, redundancies are up. The government scheme has no doubt helped. And I think hopefully the governments internationally have learned the lessons from the financial crisis, and they know that they cannot strangle the life out of the economy. So it's good to see them spending money. Companies have been forced into developing high trust models overnight. So a colleague of mine, Rob, runs a talent summit, and the online talent summit, and he had John O'Riordan from Shopify on. And John has over 300 people working remotely in Ireland. It's a great company. But he was sort of saying it took him years to develop a high trust model, and lots of companies are having to do it overnight. So again, we're all learning, and in the Sigmar we're learning as well, you know, what success looks like in this new environment. Companies are repurposing staff. You see this when a lot of, say, senior staff come down and are now willing to do jobs they otherwise wouldn't have done. There's new channels of business being created, and I'll reference a few of them in the future, because again, when you're looking at these new channels, they're the types of companies you should be following and looking to apply to. We've learned a lesson from 2010, cash is king. Gig work is increasing. I'll go into gig work a bit later, because there's lots of misnomers about gig work. Temporary agency work is up in retail and healthcare, down elsewhere. Legislation has also been shelved. For a while I was president of the National Recruitment Federation, and I spent a lot of time lobbying government not to make Ireland uncompetitive internationally, but it's interesting to see that California, the UK and ourselves have shelved a lot of that legislation. Trends. The office is dead. Well, not dead, but to put it in perspective, Alphabet, who are the parent company of Google, etc., put on hold. They were going to, I think in the last 6 weeks, it was 22 million square foot of retail space that they're not going to take now. So big changes. My own industry has changed a hell of a lot. So to put this in perspective, last year we saw a big increase in video interviewing. In Sigmar we use a tool called Interview, and we found it fantastic. But when I say the market grew by about 500%, it grew from probably 1% to 5%. So it wasn't a revolution by any means. But in the last 6 months, it's everywhere. All videos are by interview, or all interviews are by video, sorry. We're seeing online hiring decisions, online medicals, online onboarding. You know, changes have been fast forward, and many of them are here to stay. Personally, I welcome them, but a lot of my industry is going to have to redesign and readapt to stay alive. So over to you guys. What's in your span of control? Okay, so I want you to think a little bit of yourself maybe as a product, okay? So what can you do, and what actions can you physically take to get ahead and to get noticed in this market? So as a product, you got to benchmark yourself. So you can do that by ringing recruiters, by going online, by looking at Glassdoor, by looking at job adverts. You know, benchmark yourself and see, you know, am I in demand in the market? And you know, what salary and where? So as a product, and if you're not in demand, you have a couple of opportunities, you have a couple of things you can do. You can reskill and retrain, and I know that's not something that everyone can easily do. You can increase your employability skills. I know Michelle is going to talk a lot about that next week. You can also relocate. So back in 2010, a lot of my pals who worked in construction, my advice to them was, if you want to keep the same career trajectory, if you want to maintain your earnings, you have to emigrate, unfortunately. Now, in the COVID world, emigration is probably not as big a valve, an escape valve for any economy. Many of those who stayed at home then had to readjust their salary expectations. You know, they had to reprice themselves. But what everyone has to do, because if you think of it, we've still got 1.8 million people in employment, probably going to grow. We're probably at our lowest ebb at the moment, hopefully. So if you're one person in that market, you'll always find an opportunity, and it's up to you to get out and promote yourselves. So get to market. And again, some promotion tools include CV, LinkedIn, some activities are networking and preparing properly for interview. And again, Michelle is going to cover a lot of this in her webinar. So make sure you register and tune in for it. I'm going to skim through it for now. My philosophy on CVs is summed up by this. You know what I mean? If you have not hurt your head when you're writing a CV, you haven't tried hard enough. If you're not completely frustrated writing a CV, you haven't tried hard enough. If you send the same CV to 2 different jobs, that's a sin. CV is extremely important. If you want to think of it like this, a CV is your sales presentation. It should be tailored to every opportunity, whereas your LinkedIn and social is more your marketing collateral. Okay? So here's where a lot of CVs will end up. If you think demand is slightly down and supply of candidates is up, so your competition has just got harder. So the worst and the most frustrating place for a candidate CV to end up, and for recruiters who put them in there, is the no feedback maybe pile. Okay? And we all think we're brilliant, but again, if there's 20 brilliant CVs, we have to stand out. So a few quick top tips on them is deliver the message of suitability immediately. Don't go in the maybe pile. White space isn't a problem. Print it out and get the user experience. Highlight your achievements, have a call to action, and tailor customized target. I know I keep repeating that, but you must do that. Again, on LinkedIn, it's keep it up to date. Make sure your status is correct, you're open to opportunities, and network. Okay, it's not as good as people think for networking, but it's not bad. What you can do is hustle, and I just want to run through a couple of quick tips on hustling and things to watch out for. So again, if a company is seeking an internal recruiter, follow that company, keep an eye on them. They will be hiring soon, guaranteed. Consider stepping stone jobs. Last year's graduates might have stepped right into their dream career. This year's more than likely might need to go in a rung or 2 below, or in a different company or a competitor, or something different, but you have to consider them. Incorporate videos as part of your application. So again, I received a TikTok video last week. I'm not recruiting for recruiters at the moment, but this guy sent me what I found was hilarious, brilliant TikTok video, and I'm going to interview him because someone like that can survive in the new world. Someone like who's got that hustle, I want to have working for me. So I know a lot of people might not be comfortable with it. I'm not particularly comfortable with it myself, but you got to get comfortable with it. You got to try it. Avoid job listings older than 2 weeks. It's just going to frustrate you. The only exception is if you're going for quite a senior role. Unemployment is not a stigma.
Hi all, if you can see me, apologies. Frank is coming back. He just had a minor technical issue. I can see him coming back here now in a sec. There he is.
I'm back. Can you hear me? Hello, can everyone hear me? Good, okay. Apologies about that, folks. We've got guys outside the door now, and they're checking the lampposts. So if you give me 2 seconds, I'm going to go into my email and get the presentation back up and running. So that the power went in the whole house, so I got a bit of a shock, and I went running around going, "What's happened? Who's doing what?" But it was me. It was the guys outside. So they've I don't know. I hope they don't do it again. So 2 seconds, I'll be back with you.
That's okay, Frank. And while you're doing that, that's cool. If anybody is on here, if you'd like to submit a question in the Q&A section down the bottom of your screen there, it'd be great to see what questions you might have for Frank. It'd be great to hear if you have any thoughts so far as well.
I hope I didn't lose too many people, Jen.
No, we're good.
So
100 now, which is great.
So I'm going to go in now and share my screen. So share. Now, hopefully back in Bizzo and the guys leave me alone. Excellent. Okay. Okay. So where was I? We were here. This is probably not the best slide to come in because a lot of people probably aren't going to like this slide. When you're looking for a job, unfortunately, you may need to consider for the summer anyways, maybe consider an internship, maybe a 2 or 4 week internship. Consider gig work, which I'll go into in a moment, contracting or temporary agency work, or even start your own business. At the end of this presentation, I'll show you a couple of companies that are doing some good stuff. So if you see any needs that aren't met, by all means, get out and try and start your business. So good news, remote work does not require leaving your house. And we've seen lots of the big global brands and seen some big Irish brands also at the moment sort of saying, you know, you can work from home forever. So Bank of Ireland are dropping some of their office space. They want remote workers. The same Twitter have said they can work from home for as long as it takes. The gig economy. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this because there's many misnomers on it. You kind of hear things like the sharing economy, the collaborative economy, the platform economy. And again, most people, when they think of it, probably think of Uber and Google. They think probably more blue collar, or that magic person who comes to your house and puts your IKEA wardrobe together. No, an essential skill set. But it's a lot more than that. Okay, so Eurofound, which are a European research institute based here in Dublin, they do great stuff. As long ago as 2017, which is a long time ago in gig economy terms, they identified 10 distinct categories. Okay, so 10 distinct categories of gig work. And they used these 4 pillars to look at, to define them. The skill level required, whether it was on location or in person, the scale of the task, and then who selected. Was it a robot selector like Uber, or was it the client? So for most people on this call, the 2 sectors that we look at, I'm sure some of you may have done some click work in college, like, and done some surveys and done some tagging and done some SEO stuff. But the two sectors we should probably look at here are both on the online high-skilled work. One is specialist platforms like 99 Designs, which is for marketing, web design, logos, apps. Kaggle, which is for data science, it's owned by Google now. GoPillar, which is for draftspeople, draftsmen, women, architects, designers. So they're quite specialist. They put a contest out, people submit their bids, for want of a better, or their applications, and the winner gets paid. So again, it can be quite competitive, but it is lucrative for many. And then also, and again, I call this the more traditional recruitment. So to me, I see these as competitors. Collab3 are a online recruitment company in science. You have Fiverr, who started off in Israel as kind of a Nixers.com, because it was jobs for a Fiverr. They've moved up the food chain and are now kind of a more all-round online recruitment platform, as are Virtual Vocations, and probably the most famous one, Upwork. So Upwork may not see me in Sigmar as a competitor, but I certainly see them as one and want to move into their space. A little bit on interviews, because online interviews are slightly different. Again, what we're trying to tell our candidates nowadays is think of T: technology, environment, and approach. And sometimes stuff happens where people cut your power, but usually, and in fairness to UCD, they made me check this over and over again. So I have to take the fall for this. Your technology and your environment, and again, your approach. So you're turning into a conversation, because the more you can turn something into a conversation online, the more comfortable you are and the more comfortable the interviewer will be. And again, some top tips: road test the tech and use a headset for better sound. So I'm hoping you couldn't hear them digging up the road. Don't overdo the props, and prepare and practice examples on other human beings. Your examples, your stories should be facts and stories. Facts tell, stories sell. Okay, so the big differences between online interviews and face-to-face include: give more visual signals over audio. Audio tends to break the flow, and even though you might think it's the natural thing to do, it tends to break the flow of a conversation. So, just nod your head. Feel free to check back more often. Simple things like, does that make sense? Is that what you're looking for? Again, this is the added benefit of turning it into a conversation for you. Smile, your face is under more scrutiny, and don't be negative about anything, because again, when we do interview prep in Sigmar, we sometimes record people and get them to tell a negative story, and they're surprised at how angry they can look when they're negative. So don't be negative about anything. Now on to the future. And it is hard to predict the future. One of the maddest predictions I've seen online is from Elon Musk, who's very successful, but he reckons we'll have city on Mars by 2040. I can't see that. Again, I have a colleague of mine, Rob's Talent Summit. He had Margaret Heffernan talking, and Margaret said, look, any prediction outside of 18 months, don't listen to it. So I tend to agree with her. What we are seeing to emerge, and it's starting to get tagged like this, is that it's the low touch economy. And it is what it says in the tin. It's, we're living in a world that's, we're not shaking hands as much, we're not hugging as much. They reckon that the virus didn't spread in Japan as much because they don't hug and kiss each other as much. Who knows? But we are moving into a low touch economy, and the impacts that will be many. So be constantly on the lookout here. Working from home. It's good. There's good points. We'll have more rural opportunities. You know, you can work from different parts of the country, provided your broadband's okay. There's people with physical disabilities will have options of more different types of jobs. So there's great points from a lot more working from home. There are challenges too. You know, people's mental health, they don't have the same contacts they had every day. And measuring productivity, and this is something that companies are going to have to fast forward and have to get used to, because it's certainly a new world. Be on the lookout for emerging sectors and disruptors. So a company I'm following personally, and I love what they do, is a company called Let's Get Checked. So an Irish company, and basically what they're doing is a lot of online testing. So you go to their website, you pick the test you want, they send you a kit, you send it back to them, and then they send you out your prescription, or not, depending on what may be wrong, or else direct you to a doctor. Now, it hasn't kicked off in Ireland as much as it has in the States, but in the States, they're linked with all the big pharmacies, the CVSs, etc., and they're doing a bomb. Look out for innovators. So a company here called ME Controls, one of their products is a water cannon. And apart from some of the Trump supporters in California, there's probably not much need for water cannons at the moment. But they repurposed it, they modified it, they changed their water cannon to tap into a new demand, which is disinfection of open spaces. So companies like that are always worth to follow, a new market. The biggies can be good too. Pepsi, in the space of 30 days, launched 2 new direct-to-consumer platforms, PantryShop.com and Snacks.com. I haven't tried them yet, must do, but it's great for them. New route to market, increased market share. Supply chains will, as I referenced earlier, how we've benefited from, say, nearshoring of funds jobs, which is great. Now, again, most of them are contracts or contracts rather than permanent at the moment, but we're starting to see some permanent roles come back in funds. And they hadn't been seen in the IFSC for probably a year in any great volume. But supply chains will be impacted. There'll be less outsourcing. You'll probably see less globalization, not just because of Brexit, etc., but if the pie is smaller and countries are fighting over it, they'll get a bit more competitive. Centralized supply chains will be split up, I think, because a lot of people's supply chains fell over, unfortunately, when things have, things are changing. Opportunities will be here. So for nearshoring, and there'll be new processes, etc. But there's a thing there called dark stores, and it has an ominous kind of sound about it. But you can think of stuff. Basically, a dark store is a store that the consumer doesn't enter. So you could imagine that if Tesco's demand went to 80% online, they'd be better off having a warehouse in Sandyford rather than a big floor space in Dundrum Shopping Centre. What you do see, I don't know, it's a good program. Watch it if you can find it. Panorama did an expose on Deliveroo and Just Eat. And they found that these spaces in London that weren't used by anyone, and they were full of these containers. And it was actually restaurants, delivery restaurants in these containers. So you'd order online from the Royal Spice of whatever. And again, the Royal Spice was actually a container in under a bridge in London somewhere. So that's what they call the dark stores. And there will be lots of that stuff going on. A lot of them more positive than that story. Opportunities. Remote first business models are here. Okay, but they're going to really grow. So an example of this is, in the metropolis that is Tralee County, Kerry, Sigmar have 30 recruiters, highly skilled recruiters, recruiting not for one job in Ireland, let alone Kerry. They're recruiting for Germany, Sweden, France, Holland. And this remote work will give us all an opportunity, and Ireland is expertly placed. And if there's any entrepreneurs listening, get on board this, because you can enter nearly any market in Europe. And with Brexit hamstringing our neighbours, it might be a good time. Like there's other questions: will course go online? Will there be less field roles? And will there be a premium paid for field roles? Again, I was talking to the girls in UCD there, and there is challenges around remote learning, remote teaching, remote marking of exams. So there's lots of room for innovation here. There'll be new jobs. So a lot of the gamers out there could become drone traffic controllers or drone pilots, etc. Again, you're sort of seeing the need for healthy food. There's already a need for urban agricultural specialists. A lot of the real estate in places like Hong Kong and Singapore, they need to grow food on roofs. And then this was a story from last year I liked, is that we saw the return of the milkmen to the streets of London in 2018-19. And we've also seen it in Ireland now with mymilkman.ie. But basically, it was driven by a demand for glass. So environmental reasons brought milkmen back onto the streets. But now they have a brilliant delivery. They have a brilliant supply chain for healthy food, and they're now expanding. So there's always nice things that happen in crisis, and things that are unexpected. So my final words before I move to questions, I see a few of them popping up there, is get out there and hustle. It is in your span of control. Thank you for listening and for putting up with the right break.
Thanks very much, Frank. That was such an interesting presentation. And it's possible that some of the questions that popped up have actually been answered throughout your presentation. But I was trying to group some of the questions, just to even make it easier for yourself to answer. So there was just a few questions. If we look firstly maybe at the kind of CV recruitment space, about video, what kind of videos would you kind of have you seen popped into applications, or you mentioned putting videos into CVs?
Yeah, or else yeah, there's different sectors have different norms, but it is becoming the norm because people are getting used to it, and but you can still, it's becoming the norm to do video interviews. It's not yet the norm to do what we call an introduction, a video introduction.
Okay.
So we actually get our candidates to, in less than a minute, 3 points why they're perfect for the job. We get them to record it themselves. You can do it on a smartphone. It doesn't have to be a glitzy production. Short, sweet, specific, why they're good for the job. And we attach that. Like I put a little link into YouTube, etc., with my CV.
Very good. Just your kind of top tips for telephone and video, or telephone and interviews, like kind of how to nail your video, or sorry, your phone and interview.
But the phone interview, for me the foundation stone of any interview is to have your examples and have your examples practiced. And to the best tip I can ever give anyone is that once you're happy with your story, Chris Rock, the comedian, used to practice his jokes 249 times. It sounded when he was talking like it was the first time he ever even thought of it. Okay, so if the more times you tell a story, the better it gets. Even if you're telling a story about, say, I go out with the lads on a Thursday, by Sunday when I'm telling that story again, it's a much better story and I'm more comfortable with it. And I also know I've got a great punchline coming, so I can kind of relax through it. So the more times, so find another human being, I think I put that there, say, look, I have an interview coming up. Can I see what you think of this story? And go through it with them. You'll get your visual cues. It can only be positive. They may take the chance to get back at you for not doing the dishes or not taking the bin out or something. But the real feedback is maybe a couple of hours later, or even the next day, tap them on the shoulder and go, come here. Remember that story I told you about placing that CEO? Can you repeat it back to me? And that's the most honest feedback you'll ever get, ever. Because that shows the impact of what stuck with your story, how effective you were. And as I go back to that story examples, I like to break. I know the STAR model, personally, I found too complicated to follow. I prefer the nice, simpler one, start, middle, end, where the end was my punchline and it was linked to my start. Someone mentioned phone interviews there. Again, the phone interview is even more important to check back all the time.
Okay.
All the time.
Very good. There's a few questions with the same theme around gaps in the CV. So there might be some people who will be experiencing gaps in their CV now, or previously career changers. Disclose that or not, or what would you recommend there?
You have to cover the gap, and again, a gap of a few months is not a big deal. A gap of 6 months plus is. But again, it's kind of and I was only talking about this with somebody last week, is that I had a great candidate, and what he was doing for the last 2 years, he was minding the kids, and he was afraid to put it in. Put it in. It's a great thing to put in. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of figure out what you were doing. Like if people were messing around, they're probably not going to be the best candidates, but they have to find a way of covering that gap. Is it traveling? Is it taking up a new hobby? Is it trying to write that novel? Is it trying to start a new business? A common way, if I look back at CVs from say 9, 10, 11, what you tend to see on them for people is, consultant. And they might have done 1 or 2 projects, but they've managed to close that gap there.
Okay.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that's very good advice. I think the best is to be upfront. Don't let the recruiter join their own conclusion. So there's a few questions then coming through from international, I suppose, students and graduates who are tuning in from India or abroad right now, and they really want to come back to Ireland. They really enjoy their educational experience here. They're probably looking maybe for some hints and tips about navigating the market from abroad. So they're in their home country now. And would you have any hints and tips around that?
It's probably depending on what they're looking at. It's either, if it's in IT, they're probably okay. If it's in pharmacy, they're okay. As I said, companies are still sponsoring people within those categories. If they're not, they need to benchmark themselves. And if there's an oversupply of say, for example, marketing professionals in Ireland relative to demand, ignore Ireland and look for somewhere else. I know that might sound harsh, but if you benchmark yourself and see, look, okay, is my skill set in demand? Great. That's phase one. Phase two is, how much competition do I have? And if the answer is too much competition, I would probably look elsewhere. Now, having said that, a day is a week is a month, and a month is a year nearly in this. So you kind of keep on top of it, and things are changing so quick. You got to keep on top of it.
Okay, very good. So there's a few questions along that theme and about CVs and recruitment. So there is a graduate bootcamp coming up that hopefully will cover some of those questions as well. So lots of questions, Frank. So your session, your episode had a great impact. I'll just try and pick out a few more. Do in your experience, do employers check LinkedIn and social media? Like, do they do a search on that before they would maybe meet someone?
More and more.
Okay.
So more and more, it's and certainly they'll have how to put it, they'll have a lot more CVs to look at. So your biggest bump is getting into the I want to be considered pile, and once you're in that, they will more and more check your LinkedIn. And what if you've got to be proud of your LinkedIn, if it's up to date, put the link in on top of your CV so they can check it themselves.
Okay, very good. A question there from John Paul, just in relation to maybe getting feedback, maybe if you were unsuccessful. So if you don't get the job, is there a best approach that you would take to get feedback?
If it was me, I would call directly. And again, there is a certain level of paranoia, and which is understandable from some hirers, about being too honest in giving feedback. And interviews, they're not an exact science, and they're not perfect. And some of the feedback can come across as subjective. So again, if you're going through an agency, the agency should get you feedback. But unfortunately, I'm seeing some companies who tell us up front they're not going to give feedback because they're afraid of getting sued. And certainly some of the bigger multinationals, their policy is just no feedback, it's yes or no. And again, probably if it off the shelf, and if you hear this type of feedback, it's probably not genuine. If someone says, you were brilliant, you came second, that's probably the off the shelf default feedback that people give people just to move them on. So I'd probably adopt the approach. I'd ring directly and say, really appreciate the time. What can I improve on? So ask it frame it in a positive manner where they would feel less threatened. Very good.
I see a question there from Ria. Are there hot skills that you think I could focus on learning while I have a bit more time to spare at the moment? So I'm sure there's lots of people, some recent graduates who are looking into the next 3 months and wondering how they could best utilize that time.
It's a short period of time, and it is changing. If you go on, if you look at some of those, I know you're going to share the presentation, look at some of those online recruitment companies, and you will see immediately what skills are in demand. And the good news, for maybe some of the national students, is some of those can be done from your current location. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, in the gig economy, it's a very broad church, but roughly about 90% of the work is coming from the States, and probably about 90% of the work is being completed in Asia. So, there are opportunities there. And if you want it, so again, the hottest skills, the ones that are going to be with us for a while, around infrastructure and IT, connectivity and IT, stuff that can't be learned in science and pharma and engineering.
Okay. Very good. There's a question there. Hi, Frank. Thank you for sharing your presentation. Have you any advice for obtaining practical skills? So this person has been following your advice, doing lots of online courses and maybe looking to gain more practical skills. So maybe, Frank, some volunteering work in there. Would that maybe?
No, absolutely. It's and I should have mentioned that. Very good. Volunteering work is great. Again, an internship is not a popular word in Irish culture. It's ubiquitous in France. You know, it's everywhere in France. And a 2 to 4 week internship, while it's horrible to think of in the short term for a lot of people having invested so much in their education, it does give them an extra string to their bow. It means if a job comes along there first, it's probably the best interview they could ever do because they're seen on the job. Again, one of the best hires we made in Sigmar in marketing came from an internship. You know, so it was kind of another one came from a short-term stint in reception. So
Brilliant.
it's kind of they're two of our best hires ever, you know.
Yeah, and I think that example that you mentioned about the TikTok video that you received, you might have a vacancy, but you're going to interview that person. You know, that was someone who, you know, used some practical opportunity to gain some experience. So that's really good. Julia, if you had an experience that you can't really prove, for example, a lack of certificate, still include that in your CV?
If I did it, yes. If I didn't, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't get what, again, there should be a record. So if you did it, yeah, be honest there.
Okay, very good. So we probably have time for maybe one or two more questions if anyone has anything else. So Kian has said, thanks Frank. How might prospective workers go about gaining additional legal labour right protection within the gig economy roles?
Oh, that's
yeah, so maybe that's coming along after the gig economy is so new.
Well, here's one for you. The extra protections for the gig economy in California, we're going to shut down a lot of the gig economy in California. So it's sometimes be careful what you wish for. There are parts of the gig economy which need big time regulation, and that where workers are being exploited, like people paying below minimum wage, etc. But say an example where sometimes, and there's always exceptions, but sometimes people can get carried away on something, was the 0 hours contracts in Ireland. 0 hours contracts were only done by one retailer, two retailers, and a couple of hospitality. So less than 1% of a small percentage of the population were actually 0 hours contracts. Everyone wanted them gone. It was a no-brainer, but yet the politicians sort of built it up into a big thing, which it wasn't. In the UK, it was, and the protections were needed over in the UK. So it's kind of that's a conversation we could have over many virtual points.
Very good. So there's Katie just was asking thoughts on single page CVs. I guess she's wondering maybe is it more impactful or punchy to condense it?
It's
2 page.
Okay, so it's a norm in the US to have a 1-page CV. And if I look at a US CV, I hate them because every spare centimetre is taken up with something or other. In Ireland, in the UK, it's a norm for 2 or 3. Once it's relevant. Again, back to Mark Twain, you know what I mean? Shorten, bring it down. I'm not saying cut it to shreds, but don't have it where everything is just, oh my God, I can't read this. Like I've recruited in America once or twice and it does my head in. I tend to double space them out for myself so I can read them, you
know. So we have job prospects in the field of environmental science or climate change. Any tips there? Yeah,
I think that's a slow burner, and I think a lot of speech play gets paid to it. We are seeing an increase, but it's a very low increase, and I have a worry that while in the short term a lot of this COVID is good for the environment, I have a worry that when money tightens up, that we'll be thinking less about the environment. Having said that, yesterday I was delighted to hear Macron has put in a massive grant in place for e-cars. Now I think that's purely a French Mayfain thing to do, but you will get exceptions. So again, I wouldn't look for too much. I wouldn't see too much extra demand in that, unfortunately.
Okay, very good. Probably just take maybe one more final one there. There's someone has been teaching but changing careers during the crisis. Not sure what sectors would be interested in this skill set without having to maybe, I suppose, have the financial outlay of upskilling. Possibly, Frank, maybe e-learning or, you know.
Well, yeah, the e-learning is one, and it's in flux at the moment. So you don't know where it's going to go, but I can imagine the money again. It seems a straight line that e-learning will be a big thing in the future. Again, if they're moving from teaching is a difficult thing, because they've spent, you spent a long time doing this very specific job. Yes, you have transferable skill sets, and in a booming economy, it's easier to transfer those skill sets. When there's a higher supply of candidates, your competition, will be more intense. So it's harder. So you have to go in a couple of rungs down on the ladder. So again, I'm not talking, maybe that's the stepstone job, get into a company or a career you want to get into, rather than try and get into it straight away.
Okay, very good. Well, Jenny, I think we're maybe are we running low on time? So just to say, I guess, thanks very much, Frank. It was an excellent presentation. I think there's a lot of food for thought there, and lots of really interesting questions as well. So thank you very much for your time. Jenny, I don't know.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Michelle. And thanks, just to echo what Michelle said there, thank you so much, Frank. That was a really insightful and interesting presentation. I think we all learned something that we can definitely take away from it, including how to cope with technological glitches that are outside of our control.
You missed me screaming, but just if anyone wants to link in with me, feel free. If anyone wants to ask follow-up with questions, feel free. And again, I know you're going to share the presentation, but thank you all, and best of luck. Keep hustling, yeah? Thanks
so much. That's very generous of you. And thanks also to you, Michelle. You managed that busy Q&A session very well. God, there's so many questions there. It was brilliant to have them all condensed down.
Maybe just to say, Jenny, there's lots of questions. The series is running till the 6th of August, so I guess there's lots of opportunities. If we didn't get around to your question, hopefully over the course of the next number of episodes, we get to you.
Absolutely. That is a brilliant suggestion. Yeah, we're here, as I said, every second Wednesday between now and the 6th of August. So there's a lot of opportunity then to tune into those different webinars. And for our attendees, you'll find the recording of this webinar and the slides that Frank used on the UCD Alumni Network. It's a networking platform for UCD alumni and students alike, where you can find tons of different resources. If you haven't registered before, you will need to create a profile, but our team are sharing the relevant links with you in the chat at the moment. As far as I know, Camille is sharing them there, and the team are also on standby expecting you to join. So you'll find plenty of the career building resources in the What It Takes Resource Hub, which have been curated by us and by our UCD colleagues. When you leave, if you could complete the short survey, which will appear in a link once this webinar ends, we'd really appreciate it. As it's our first one, it'll be really helpful for us to help us shape the future webinars in this series. So just to say thank you all for attending and participating so enthusiastically. Our next webinar will take place on Wednesday, June 10th at lunchtime, featuring Michelle, who you've all just met, and we'll focus on what it takes to prepare for the recruitment process. So yeah, I said, if you'd like to check the chat of this webinar, my colleague Camille is sharing the relevant links with you there. So we hope to see you there on June 10th. I hope you enjoy this beautiful sunny day, and we'll see you then. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.